It's my car right now, and I'm about to say goodbye to it. Not sure how I'm feeling right now at the moment.
What is going on, guys? So I've been meaning to make this video for quite some time now, and I had a chance to finally put a compilation together, but I've owned the Mark 7 Generation R for almost 3 years, 2 and change. So this also means I've parted ways with my old Mark 6 for the same number of years. So the question is, do I miss the Mark 6? The answer is yes. I traded in my 2012 Mark 6 with 30,000 miles, and in return, I drove home this 2017 Golf R CP Old. To my family, this is actually the same looking car to them, similar color. The Peas Blue Metallic is just a tad darker than the Rising Blue. But since I daily drove both generations, I'm going to do a compare and comparison in today's video. So let's go ahead and get started. So what do I miss about the Mark 6? Well, to start off, other than the button feedback, which I liked more on the Mark 7, I prefer the Mark 6 steering wheel because I think it looks more aggressive than the Mark 7. It's thicker, more of a flatter bottom design. Overall, the side was more angular as well than the Mark 7, which is why I went for the aftermarket wheel wrap on the 7R. But I do like the button feedback, like I said, on the newer generation, so I think the perfect combination VW should have done was to keep the old steering wheel from the Mark 6, and then from there transfer it over the Mark 7 steering wheel for the feedback. But let's go ahead and just take a look outside and focus on the exterior for now, and then we'll come back to the interior. The Mark 6 body style is still the best, but of course, looks are subjective, and that's just my opinion. I prefer the Rising Blue over the Peas Blue to this day, but I'm glad I stuck with at least a shade of blue overall for the car. When the Spectrum program was introduced, I was especially envious of the 91 Blue or the Jazz Blue offering. That would have been pretty nice. The Mark 6 was sold with the stock 18-inch Talladega wheels with all-season Dunlops or Pirellis, and the Mark 7, in my year, was offered in a 19-inch Pretorius. Dedicated Summer Continentals, I believe. As we approach the front of both vehicles, I still think the 6R remains more aggressive compared to the Mark 7. I think the main reason why are the corner vents on the previous model, which reminds me of an R8 look. So even though the brake ducts are functional on the Mark 7, it just doesn't give off the aggressive look that I'm looking for. And in addition, the satin chrome doesn't mesh well with the blue at all. I think the only color chrome works with is the black sapphire pearl. The Mark 6s in general are rare, but if you're looking for a two-door look, they will become even more rare on the streets now, because if you're looking for a Mark 7R in the States, you're stuck with a four-door model. There are definitely advantages to this. I found that the four-door look seems more proportional. It has shorter driver's door, which allows me to get closer to a tighter parking spot against the wall. With an extra 2 doors, I usually open up the rear windows, and that creates a perfect airflow on a nice day. So 4 doors is a win-win for both driver and passenger. So looking at the rear hatch, you can tell both of these vehicles have aftermarket spoilers. One has stock taillights, and one has OEM LED taillights, along with the GTI Fast logo on both. Now in the Mark 6, the suspension was fixed. I eventually had it lowered about an inch or so with the VWR springs coupled with the H&R sway bar. It was really a good combination, but as you can tell from here, the Mark 7 is already scraping the front Maxton lip, even on stock suspension, which is adjustable anyway using the DCC. Now as we take a look under the hood, I prefer the engine bay on the 7R, which has your more upgraded engine, but it's actually easy to work with. Simple air intake modifications do not require you to remove the stock engine cover, like I did in the Mark 6. The old cover and airbox was integrated, so that made it a hassle to work with. Also, the oil filter in the newer generation can be accessed from the top, which makes oil changes easier as well. As far as the lighting goes, the Mark 6 and the Mark 7, both of them offer distinct characteristics. The Mark 7 has a dedicated DRL strip on each side of the car versus the Mark 7 with the quad U shape inside the housing. As far as I know, both of them offer the same type of lighting output, which is bi-xenons, versus the LED output only found in the 2018 plus Mark 7.5, which offers LED lighting output. Approaching the rear hatch of both vehicles, both of them pretty much remains the same, but that's a good thing because Volkswagen kept the center pass-through along with the 60/40 split. I do prefer the hatchback privacy cover in the Mark 6 because that one had a netting under the tonneau cover, and that was useful in holding shop towels and other miscellaneous items. And now I need this organizer to hold my detail supplies. Starting in 2015, Volkswagen decided not to include the spare tire for Golf R owners, but you can easily retrofit one like you see in the video right now. As I mentioned before, I think the Mark 6 looks more aggressive in the front. The rear, however, I think is a tie. I like them both. But before we take a look further inside, let's talk about exhaust. The exhaust sounds on both generations do not sound good from factory. The Mark 6 was just way too quiet, and in the Mark 7, it's louder but not by much. And that's only when you put the car into sport mode, then let the valves open up. Still nothing to brag home about. The quad tips on the Mark 7 are nice, but I prefer the dual center outlets, which is what Volkswagen should have stuck with from factory. And as you can tell, I went through my fair share of exhaust systems for the older generation, but eventually I went back to the factory, catback, made it to a 42 Draft Designs downpipe, and I completed the system with custom 4-inch chrome tips from Magnaflow. Alright, so let's take a look inside, specifically at the seats. As I stated plenty of times before, I prefer the MK6 seats over the MK7 in terms of just design and logo placement. The headrests on the 7R seems very generic and bland compared to the one in the Mark 6. And I think the side bolstering on the Autobahn seats in the 6R was a little bit more higher and supportive than the 7R. But check out the condition of these seats in the Mark 6 before I traded the vehicle. That is the condition of leather 5 years into owning the vehicle, and luckily these seat covers were transferable to the new car. And also note, the Mark 6 seats are manual versus the power adjustability on the newer generation, but that's for the driver's side only. As we approach the rear of the vehicle, easier access to the back seats, obviously in the Mark 7. Incandescent lighting in the Mark 6 versus the LED lighting in the Mark 7. But I want to focus on these European headrests that I purchased for the Mark 7. Overall, I like these as an aftermarket modification. Technically it's OEM plus. Just gives me more or better visibility in the rear. Also, when you fold down the seats, you don't have to move your driver or passenger seat upwards for it to fold down completely. Now, with all this talk about how good the Mark 6 generation was to me, do I not like the current car? Most definitely not. As a matter of fact, I think the Mark 7 is a great car, and in many ways a huge improvement from the previous platform. In a way, going for the DSG made the car so much more reliable. Significant upgrades that come to mind is an increase in power and torque from factory. The engine is much better, but we'll talk about that later in the video. As for the rest of the upgrades, although most of these are creature comforts, they are noticeable and well appreciated for being usable as a daily driver. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the interior of the 7R and see what we like about it. Starting off, the multi-function display. It is in color. I mean, it's nothing compared to the full-on digital display in the facelifted Golf R, but it's a pretty welcome change to the grayscale old school MFD. Now what I did retrofit from the facelifted R is this 8-inch Discover Pro display that you see here. The rain sensing wipers and the automatic high beams are nice to have. It's not a must, but again, it's one of those features that you don't think you need, but after having it, you gotta have it in the next car. So moving on, the adaptive cruise control with your driver's assistance package is also one of these features. Taking a look at here, the feedback on these newer 7R steering columns are really nice. They're tactile but soft to the touch, and adding to it, the 7R improves on your driving capabilities by giving you availability in terms of selecting your custom drive modes, comfort, normal, and sport. So the Golf R Mark 6s had a 2-year model run from 2012 to 2013 versus the Mark 7s, which began in 2015 to 2019. And here you can see that I have no sunroofs on either car. The Mark 7s were actually reserved for the European models to have sunroofs, which was disappointing in a way for the amount that you're paying. But here is a direct comparison between the 2 generations of flat bottom steering wheels, and of course I prefer the Mark 6s. Here I have a European light switch that I had to retrofit versus the Mark 7s, which came from factory. In order to go ahead and get these city lights here to function on the Mark 6s, I had to go ahead and buy a separate European light switch in order to have these come on. As for the mirror toggle switches, I also prefer the Mark 6s because it's just, in my opinion, ergonomically placed. It feels like every time I toggle or tilt down the left side driver's window, I'm adjusting the x-axis, so it's a lot easier in the Mark 6. Now, to keep track of boost, I went ahead and got a new south boost gauge for the Mark 6. The only thing about it was that it took away the function of the driver's side air vent. Versus the Mark 7, as you can tell, the performance monitor came stock from factory, which is of course a welcome change because it'll save me money from buying another boost gauge. But I still like the color match needles on New South. Moving along, we have your 20% Lumar tint on the Mark 6 and your 50% ceramic tint on the Mark 7. I decided to go ahead and try the tinting process myself on the Mark 7, which basically saved me about $300 or so. Both of the Golf Rs were hardwired for a dash camera. However, one underrated feature in the Mark 7 has got to be the cubby right under the light switch, which is now standard versus having to retrofit it in the Mark 6. In addition, since the Mark 7 comes standard with a auto-dimming mirror, I took the opportunity to hardwire a radar detector and attach it via this blend mount solution right here. And this is one of my favorite mods by far. Everything just fits like a glove, especially this frameless mirror. It's worth it alone to get the 2017 model just to go ahead and get this classy look. And of course, the Mark 7s come with LED lighting that is fadeable. Here we have the VCDS cable, which I carried over to the Mark 7. It was a huge plus because I saved a ton of money on it. And with it, I coded the automatic tilt up and down passenger window, your seatbelt chime off, and of course your key fob remote window up and down. But most importantly, adjusting the sound actor sensitivity on the Mark 7 is done electronically, as well as coding the exhaust flaps permanently open. And another gripe I have with the Mark 7 is the fact that there's no locking glove box option, which should be standard, and I don't know why VW left it out. Both generation Rs have Footwell Lighting, incandescent on the Mark 6 obviously, and LED for the Mark 7. However, the Mark 7 has adjustable brightness for the Footwell Lighting. In addition, what I like about the Mark 7s is the inclusion of the ambient light strips on both the driver and passenger side doors, and also the LED stripping on the side sills. on both sides as well. Blue for the Golf R and red for the GTIs. This right here is actually aftermarket. No matter what people say, I actually do enjoy to look at night. The Mark 6 Golf R came in a 6-speed manual only, exclusively, versus the Mark 7, which was offered in a 6-speed manual along with a DSG direct shift transmission or direct shift gearbox. And from here, I just want to touch base on the center cubby, which is a lot more space in the Mark 7, and also the ability to have Android Auto and CarPlay is a huge plus on the Mark 7. All you have to do is just connect to that USB connection on the Mark 7 right-handed side inside the cubby and you're set to go. Another plus in the Mark 7 is the fact that you have that center sliding console directly from factory versus me having to retrofit the European console in the Mark 6. Also, the electronic e-brake is something that I think we as our drivers take for granted, especially for a daily driver. Auto hold for me is an alright feature. I don't really use it as much because I do find it annoying when you're parallel parking, but I do find myself using it sometimes during heavy traffic. As I mentioned previously, the Mark 6 seat covers, which are made from a neoprene material, they are waterproof, sweatproof, etc. They were able to transfer over to the Mark 7 just fine, fit the dimensions like a glove, and from there it's been protecting the seats since I purchased the vehicle. And here we have the armrest comparison between the two generations. The Mark 6 opened up just fine, but the whole Mark 7 fiasco of it being sealed off shut, you actually had to open the rear air vent and from there take off a screw so that you could have the opening of the armrest. However, what happened was you lost the ratcheting function of it, and if you wanted the ratcheting function, you would have to actually retrofit a European armrest to go ahead and take advantage of it. Anyway, I did a mod. If you guys like it, just check out my video. If not, it's pretty cheap, so you guys might not really like it. But moving on, we have your obviously, I also did a video, the iAudi in the Mark 6 versus this Kinu, which I do like a lot because it's more discreet. Now, as I said, the Mark 6 was a base model, so you had to turn your key, crank the engine, versus the Mark 7, which is a push button start. Here we have the gauge sweep and also your color MFD versus your grayscale. Other than that, let's go ahead and take a look at your RNS versus the Discover system respectively. Here is what the Germans do pretty well, and that is they keep their cameras hidden in the retractable Volkswagen badge in the rear. And this nifty feature just keeps the camera free of dirt or rain and maintains their visibility during bad weather. This feature came standard with the 7R, but I had to retrofit it in the Mark 6. It was one of the most difficult modifications I did for the 6R, but it was worth it in the end. And once the Mark 6 is placed back into neutral, or the Mark 7 back into park, the camera retracts, stays hidden within the emblem, and it stays cleaner than most backup cameras out there. So finally, let's touch up on why I went from the Mark 6 to the Mark 7 upgrade, and that is the power and transmission. I mentioned previously that my car gave me a lot of troubles, specifically the clutch, and that is on me because I put a lot of stage 2 power on it and it left me stranded. The throwout bearing actually went out on me twice. So yes, I have to admit I have some gripes with the Volkswagen clutches, which is why I stuck with the tried and true Honda 6-speeds. Therefore, my past logic, since I already had the S2000 as a weekend car, to go full on automatic and trade in the Mark 6 for the Mark 7. And to this day, I don't regret going DSG at all. But I do find myself missing rolling through my own gears after I eventually sold the Honda. Next, power-wise, the EA888 is a great engine to this day for me. To me, this car feels stock, feels like a stage 1 Mark 6. However, the power delivery from the IS38 is different, in my opinion, than the K04, because from me driving it, you feel the car pull, but in a consistent manner. It's not so much like a pushback surge or a boost from the turbo from the K04. Either way, both generations offer great engine choices. The Mark 6, I was lucky enough not to have any cam follow issues, so be careful about that. To sum up, the Mark 6 to the Mark 7 transition is basically like upgrading to a newer smartphone from the same company. The two generations are so similar with a few tweaks and upgrades. It's a familiar experience owning both, similar body style, dimensions, and even color. But this time around, with a better processor, in this case a better engine, and in my opinion, the better transmission. Now, should you upgrade from a Mark 6 to a Mark 7? The way I think of it, the newer upgraded engine, the DSG transmission, the select drive modes, and also your upgraded safety technology was enough for me to go ahead and justify the upgrade costs. Anyway, that is all for this one, guys. I hope this video was insightful, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care.